This week we take another deep dive into the chakras, drawing on Richard's own meditations and experiences to understand and explore how they relate to different aspects of our life. Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show. My name is Darren Ball, and this is the podcast helping you to awaken your chakras, to unlock your psychic powers, and to discover true spirituality. So in this episode, you'll learn the true function of the lower three chakras and how they relate to compassion, correct conduct, survival, and intellectual prowess. You'll also learn what can go wrong when we overuse or misuse our lower chakras. And finally, you'll also learn about the essential role of our higher chakras and what you can change to live a more inspiring and spiritual fulfilling life in the light of truth. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet to the show, be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss any future conversations between Richard and myself, exploring information about chakras that you won't hear anywhere else.
Richard, Darren, it's great to be back here today. I wanted to start with a little bit of news before we get stuck into the show, which is going to be a great one, by the way, because it's really building on some of the amazing material we've shared about chakras recently. But news anyway, so we recently found we listened to the top 10 European spirituality podcasts.
Wow.
So, I think that's a great step.
What number, though? Where are we?
Yeah, a little bit of a glitch, though.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because we're only number 2.
Number 2?
Yeah.
Oh,
so,
okay.
I'm going to have to get onto them all.
But
you guys are going to have to get onto them.
The big spirituality, we're fine with it.
Yeah, everyone's a winner. Yeah. But anyway, we're obviously we're great to be featured there. You can check out the link in the description. That's from FeedSpot. There's other shows on there as well. But we're extremely excited about continuing to grow the show, continuing to share this amazing material, particularly on the back of your experiences that you've had recently, the somatic experience, and even this glimpse of cosmic consciousness. I think it gives people a real insight into the 9 freedoms and brings it to life in a way that we haven't really had before.
And we love the comments we're getting, don't we?
We do.
The questions.
I would encourage those all
really
the time.
Deep.
Yeah, that's true. And they pick out other things in the show that we like to bring in and make sure that we pick up on. So thank you to everyone who's been leaving any comments and questions. We do really appreciate it. So back to today's show. So we've been going deep into chakras, as I said. I mean, previously we talked about what happens when the chakras get blocked and why, what people can do to unblock them. We also talked about what happens when you awaken the chakras fully, as revealed through the experiences that Dr. King shared, and insights from your own somatic experience too. So in this episode, what I really wanted to focus on was the chakras as they relate to our mastery over life.
And of course, with Dr. King, it's on as we say, much higher level than anything I ever did. But it's quite interesting to see what he sets is the benchmark
totally
you can aspire to.
Yeah.
It's work in progress.
What's possible, because, whatever research you might do exploring online about chakra, you're not going to find that kind of thing that reveals what's your own the fullness of your divine potential.
And I think we need to give a warning about this because, and this isn't to be offensive to anyone or to try to criticize anyone, this is purely to protect people who are trying to learn the truth and do practices which are safe. Because this isn't a game. It's not just something people can sit down and think, oh, the chakras, I've read they're this color, that color, let's come up with some visualization. Funnily enough, somebody sent me a visualization the other day from a journal, which is being taught, which is really quite a dangerous one. I won't even go into it. Written by somebody who I'm sure is sincere, but little learning is a dangerous thing, said Alexander Pope, the poet in the 18th century. And it can get you into some trouble because these chakras have great power. I'll give you one example. It isn't safe, and Dr. King makes this very clear, to concentrate on the physical spots where the chakras are located at all. Other than, he says, you can concentrate on the heart.
Okay.
The heart organ, which of course the heart center is actually in the center, not left-hand side. So the dangers of doing that could he itemizes some of the dangers. You could get severe illness, you could get mental issues, you could have all kinds of problems. So you've got to know what you're doing. Now, if you, for example, as per this thing that was sent to me, start visualizing a particular color, a color that you've read somewhere is the color of the chakras. I mean, the colors, again, are not always correct. They're written by people who don't know. They haven't actually seen them. And even if you could see a chakra, as per, for example, the great occultist Leadbeater, published some images of chakras based on a clairvoyant perception of them and then an artist drawing them up. All they're drawing is those chakras as they are now, the moment that clairvoyant is seeing them, the colors they are now. And that can vary from person to person. That doesn't mean that's the natural color of the chakra. And even if you knew what the natural color of the chakra was, a chakra, when it's closed,
I see,
because you've raised Kundalini above it, can be a different color from its natural color.
Okay.
I'm just giving some examples here. I have done my own meditations on the colors of the chakras. I have my own views, which aren't a million miles away, by the way, from most people's ideas.
Sure. Yeah.
But it isn't just like, well, I don't know, the sex center is, they say orange. I believe it to be a vermilion, actually, which is a kind of an orange, but it's a reddy orange. Therefore, I'll visualize that color in that place. That could be, if it worked, and most of the time it won't work. So most of the time, because you're not doing it really well, sorry to put it that way,
the visualization,
you'll be safe. Yeah. If you did it really well, though, as I say, and you concentrate on the physical spot, it would be quite dangerous. There's the warning. And even if you got the natural color right, that's not necessarily the color that's required in that chakra to balance it, purify it, raise it. I mean, there's two fundamental problems people have. We can't say this enough. And one is that they aren't governing their lower chakras from their higher chakras. They're all good. Every chakra is good. So I read in this thing that was sent to me, somebody said that a particular lower chakra is a source of creativity. All the chakras can be creative.
Yeah.
But it's the higher creativity that needs to direct the lower creativity.
Yeah, that's a wonderful insight.
That really is a key. It's a key to life, actually.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as saying you should allow your intellect to be guided by your intuition. Because as you go higher, as you start to reach the heart center with your consciousness, you're entering super consciousness, I believe. And you're going from the conscious mind. Now, an adept, a master, will have a complete coordination between their conscious mind, their superconscious mind, and their subconscious mind. You poor old you haven't even asked me a question. I'm not going. But those are the three aspects of mind, which we can go into in more depth if you want to. But most psychologists think there are two, conscious and unconscious.
Yeah, they don't recognize.
They don't even recognize the difference between subconscious and superconscious. You can break them down, but the higher chakras tend to guide superconsciousness. The lower ones would, I believe, be more conscious. But in an adept, in a master, they have such control over the function of all their chakras that they can move from conscious to superconscious to subconscious at will. Just as a good example, any of us, we know the difference, unless we have a mental health problem, between remembering something and imagining something.
Yeah.
We know those states.
Yeah.
We know them internally. Likewise, superconsciousness or intuitive high intuition, subconscious, which includes memory, and conscious, which is what we use on the whole. So they will fuse all these, into a complete control between all these levels of mind. A less advanced person can't do that, and they're taught to strive towards the higher state. So that's one thing, governing the lower chakras from the higher chakras. That's absolutely key. And the other thing is raising the Kundalini, if you're able to, in an unforced way, in a natural way, through the spine. And raising the pranas through the spine, rather than activating chakras through a whole other Nardic system. This brings stability. This brings control. I mean, one of the things that I admire most about Dr. King, of all his powers, and he had quite a few, was his balance, his incredible balance. And I was with him very close quarters. I wasn't the only one. I saw him come out of an extremely elevated contact with the highest intelligences on earth, the Lords of the Flame as they're known, and sit down, and I happened to be with him and start talking. He had to sort of ease himself into it, and I had to try and, as best I could, to try and get some glimpse of what he was going through. But he could then, start working or start doing something else. I mean, he had this under control, and given the experiences he was having, it's quite remarkable that he could live such a balanced life and appear to many people, if he chose to be just an ordinary person.
Yeah,
and he didn't just strive not to appear to be that.
Yeah,
but I would say he went out of his way sometimes to appear to be that. Sorry.
Well, just, in reaction to that, one thing that's interesting about it, most people are not coming across people who are entering these extremely highly elevated states. So, this idea of stability, no one's even thinking about it really.
No.
Except, when you start to think about some other people throughout history, perhaps musical geniuses or otherwise, who were beginning to tap into some of these higher states for inspiration and were not balanced and stable in the way that you've described with Dr.
That's
King.
very true. So you get some geniuses, in their field.
Sure, yeah.
And they could be extremely unbalanced. And they could also cultivate the mannerisms of imbalance quite deliberately, because they kind of looked at the world and they knew that being just inverted commas, boring, dull, ordinary person. That's not what I'm saying. But that could be a perception of someone who's striving to get higher.
Sure,
is not what they wanted to be. So they didn't mind sometimes being quite eccentric.
Yeah, on purpose.
On purpose. Yeah. They didn't strive to keep that balance. They were always just striving to get the inspiration they were seeking. But what I have found, and there's a couple of good examples of this, is that some of those people, without even going into their lives, which weren't always great, actually, the way they treated people and so forth, but even in their work, they weren't reliable, because they didn't have, in certain cases, that constant guidance from the higher self, the higher chakras. They were tapping at times. I do believe they were tapping in. We have a tremendous revelation in the second freedom, which is made about a basic rise of the power. I think this is by memory.
Sure.
The power let's not do it by memory. Let's get the words absolutely right. So we have these words in the second freedom. A basic rise of the power you call Kundalini tends to partially activate one face of the heart chakra. This often manifests itself as childish emotion, sometimes referred to as sentiment. This is not the love I speak of. The love I speak of radiates from the two faces in balance, from the throat center, from the centers in the forehead, there are three of those, from all faces in balance. This is love. So you can see there a couple of interesting things. One, it's about the energy of what really love is, fullness.
Yeah.
Another is the fact that it is possible to partially activate a small aspect of a higher chakra.
Yeah.
That's the big revelation to me. And I actually believe some of the musical geniuses, for example, may have been partially activating the throat center to draw in those melody. I mean, a melody is an abstract thing. It's not something you can work out mathematically. If it's a beautiful melody, you have to draw that from a higher aspect of your consciousness. That's just to name one thing. So I think that probably has gone on. But because of the two things I mentioned, that they're not governed by their higher consciousness, their higher chakras in their lives, and even in their work all the time. So you can think of some great composers who have highly emotional passages, actually, even sentimental passages, and then they'll hit a certain peak as well. And then the other thing is raising it up through the spine, as I mentioned earlier. Now, a couple of writers who I'm kind of interested in, I'm actually a fan of both of them in a way, who I would regard as genius at their best, and many would regard, I'll name who they are in a minute, but also can be really wrong. And if you are guided in the way I've said, you won't be wrong.
I see. So it's about the constant inspiration from your higher chakra.
Exactly, because if you take an ordinary thing like finance, or the economy. You have expert economists. They are highly educated. They are tapping into the intellect. The intellect is driven, I believe, largely when it's just on its own from the solar plexus center. And it can be brilliant. It can be extremely clever. But it isn't grounded in a higher source. And that's, people say, well, no two economists really agree with each other. So they have the same information, the same material, the same analytical process, and they come to very different conclusions about what should be actually done. Now, if it was guided by a higher chakra, that wouldn't happen. Because there is truth.
I see.
There is truth, which there might be different ways of approaching that truth, but they wouldn't be fundamentally opposed because they would come to the same essential conclusion. And when you enter a real enlightened or even a samadhic state, even in what I regard as the limited way that I've done, there's only one conclusion you come to, which is that we're all one. And no one who's entered that state would disagree with that.
Totally. It's a great example.
It's just realizing it. It's the thing. Yeah, so you get these two writers I was mentioning. One is John Lennon, clearly a genius in his field, and he came up with some great things. He came up with, talking of the second freedom, all you need is love. He didn't really know what love was, I believe.
Okay.
And I think, by the way, I believe he's learned a lot since he's passed on. That's my view of it. But the statement, all you need is love, is a great statement to make. And in its highest sense, it's actually true. It's all you need in its purest sense. Then he goes on the next door in that song, which is basically globally famous song, say it's easy, which it isn't. See, this is just an example. It sounds good, but it isn't true. And then give peace a chance is a great thought, I think. And there's another one I love. I don't think he actually invented this, which is life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. That's almost like a Zen statement.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. But then he'll come up with stuff, even in his most popular stuff, against religion, against God, very negative, things that are wrong. The other writer I was going to mention was Oscar Wilde.
Oh, yeah.
Because I actually had a book project, because I love some of his statements. And the person, my PA that I work with, Nikki Wood, she'll remember this because we went into, in fact, she compiled, I think many quotes from Oscar Wilde. The reason was that I had great success with a couple of little books, Little Book of Karma, Little Book of Yin and Yang. I had this idea to do a little book of Oscar Wilde quotes and then comment on them. And it was going to be called A Walk on the Wild Side, Wild with an E. Which I think has been used since, actually. And I had a publisher really interested in it, and I think it would have sold really well. And we went into these quotes. I'll give you a couple of examples. We're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. And another one, which is really great, actually, may have it slightly wrong, but something like, every saint has been a sinner, and every sinner will become a saint.
Yeah,
that's a great statement.
Yeah.
It's
a lot of truth.
A lot of truth. It's almost. I think Yogananda said it better. He said, "A saint is a sinner who never gave up."
Yeah,
which is really good. Okay. But so there were these many great statements. But sadly enough, I found when we had this complete list that Nikki got together, many of them were just not true. They were unfortunately wrong. They were clever. They were virtually all clever, and this is my point.
Yeah.
They can be clever and wrong.
Yeah.
And everything in the end comes back to use of the chakras. So I'm sorry that was a very long-winded diversion from your question. But to be fair on Oscar Wilde, he was writing plays. So a lot of these lines appear from characters in his plays, which doesn't necessarily mean he agrees with them. And there's a bit like Shakespeare, actually, a lot of his quotes, they're from people in plays. And so that may be an out from that point of view.
There you go, Oscar. Well, let's just take it as a segue, because what's interesting there for me is basically what we're saying is that, in the case of the solar plexus, you may be brilliant and you may have a brilliant intellect and you may be, be able to do it. You gave the example of the economist and you gave those example as two writers who come up with these brilliant things, but they're not always actually true because they're not always tapping into their higher chakras and letting that inspiration govern the lower chakras.
And which of us is, by the way?
Yeah, and who is?
But that is the goal.
That is
a
the
real
goal,
master would.
Exactly.
And, but again, masters could disagree with each other on how to go about things.
Sure.
And so on. But the essential truths they will know.
Well, I'd like to tap into this theme more because you've mentioned, you've talked a little bit about the heart chakra, you talked a little bit about the solar plexus center. And standing back, obviously, there's a bigger point about allowing the higher chakras to govern the lower ones. But I think there's also in each individual chakra we can if there is an imbalance there, we can bring about a greater state of balance within that.
Yeah.
And I think it helps to understand what each chakra is really associated with in our life. What does it relate to? And therefore, how does it relate to our mastery of life, and then the broader picture that you've described about governing the higher from the lower.
By the way, I just want to throw in this. I lost money through that because I had a publisher, at least one publisher, really wanted that book.
Oh, yeah.
And, I had I think it would have sold very well, but it wasn't true. I couldn't do it. I had to give up on the project for that reason. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, that's good. Basically, that's giving us something in the name of truth, isn't it? Because it wouldn't have been correct.
And it wouldn't be helpful to people. But I do think actually some of the people who write about chakras do just that. They come with clever ideas. They look at the chakras, they come up with some clever idea. And there's quite a few leading, well-known, famous spiritual teachers, self-described spiritual teachers, and they are helping people, I'm not saying they aren't, who are very clever. They come up with very good forms of words and different things, but doesn't make it always true. And that's the problem.
Yeah, in the end, it's only whether it's true that counts.
Anyway. So going through the chakras, I want to feed back to what we said at the beginning of the show, which is you are not recommended to focus on those physical spots. And the reason actually that I'm running Awaken Your Chakras events this year is because people need to be taught how to do that safely. And strangely enough, it doesn't always mean directly focusing on the individual chakras in order to awaken them.
I see.
There are other methods.
That could be an easy misconception, wouldn't it? Yeah.
It certainly could.
Yeah.
It's about the flow of energy, the flow of prana, the flow of kundalini when you're ready. And this will activate them. And that happens through a whole series. In the Aetherius Society, we're very lucky, thanks to the master Aetherius, who gave some outstanding visualizations, which are completely safe. They do use and reference the chakras, sometimes very subtly. They definitely reference the nadis, or the channels within the aura through which the prana flows, through which Kundalini can flow, but they do it in a safe way. And I that's why I'm very excited, actually, to be running these events, because I think this is something that everyone can use, and it will get the desired result in the right way, providing you follow what's taught correctly. But it will, and once it'll do it through the back door, that would be wrong. But it isn't as straightforward as just, okay, we're talking about the base center, let's activate that one. I'll think about that. And this is, I'm sorry, it's amateur night for some teachers on chakras. They just come up, oh, well, I think of this color thing. And it's, as I say, often it won't work. But if it did work, it could be really quite dangerous. So I thought I'd just, again, throw that in and give a positive there. There are things you can do. Some of them are published in Realize Your Inner Potential, the book that I co-authored with Dr. George King. These are fantastic exercises that really work, that will activate your chakras, and these are the keys to all spiritual powers.
So if we take it back to speaking through each one of the chakras in turn, let's start with the base, and I know you referenced a little bit about the solar plexus and the heart. We'll come back to those, but when we look at the base chakra, for example, I mean, what is it related to in our life? And then I'd love to talk about what it looks like when that chakra becomes out of balance and what we might need to do to bring that back into a state of harmony.
So the base center is connected to the mystical element of earth, for those familiar with the 5 elements, actually, not the 4. As you get in astrology, you get the 4, don't you? Earth, water, fire, air. And then you have the mystical element of ether. Yeah. So the base center is connected to earth. It's a practical thing. It's absolutely essential. It's stability. It's balance. It's doing the things that you require physically to do. Could relate to your own health as well. Could certainly relate to the things you need, the things you physically need. I mean, I've come across so many people who wanted to devote themselves in service, but they weren't in a physical position to do it. They didn't either have the finance to live where they wanted to live in order to do it,
or
they didn't have the health to do it. They felt the time to do it. I'm not saying that's completely true, but they didn't. They had taken on so many commitments that they didn't need to take on. You know, again, we come back having too much experience to experience the way experience should be experienced. You can apply that to thought too. Having too many thoughts to think thoughts the way thoughts should be thunk.
Rewind the replay.
But so, you know, it's getting everything in order. It's quite a yoga. It's quite a skill, especially if your focus is on service, which I believe it should be.
Yeah.
Service is the finest way, by the way, to awaken your chakras. That might surprise people. It won't work on its own. You do need to do inner development as well, for various reasons. But every time you are serving others for no personal benefit, not even payment, or you're perhaps going beyond, and I've come across people in our health service who go way beyond what they need to do to earn their salary. I you know, when I wasn't well at one time, a nurse, I saw them being knocked off. You can go off now, you finished your stint. And they said these words, I'm not going till this patient, pointing at me, has got what they need. And they stayed. Now that is an act of service, and you see it in many fields. And you see those people who dedicate themselves in a kind of service where they're earning far less money than they could earn, where they're perhaps not earning any money at all. It's voluntary work. Volunteering, I saw in a poll recently, is extremely good for your health and well-being and for aging.
Yeah, I've seen those studies too.
Because, you know, the function of the chakras, this is something we haven't touched on, I'm glad to touch on it, affects your health. If you have your chakras working in balance, this is why Dr. King's brilliant healing technique focuses primarily on balancing the chakras before we get on to the individual ailment. If those are in balance, if those are harmonious, if they're functioning as they should be or along the lines they should be, it will absolutely improve your physical health. But the base center is all the many things you need to do to function, you might say, in the physical world.
Yeah, okay, got it. So, and then, you know, if that's the case, that's like the material things that we need and putting them in the right place, as you say, so that we can be in a position to service. We're kind of
I mean, it's a bit more than that. I mean, I'm sort of boiling it down simply. I mean, it also is has an interactive effect and on other chakras. And bear in mind, the chakras work together.
Yeah,
so very
system. System.
So very often there's an element of this and an element of that, you know, at work. In things you are doing, the practical skills to serve, and so forth.
I mean, what would you say? It looks like when that particular chakra is out of balance? I mean, how do we go wrong in that particular area?
Well, when a person is having, as many people do, most people, I'm sorry to say, probably do, having experiences without taking the energies through that chakra. And by the way, this doesn't have to be consciously done. This is like just becomes an automatic thing. You might not even know it's going on. Most people who've had great inspirations don't know what chakra was activated at that moment. Dr. King was an exception in that regard. But when you avoid those energies through the way you conduct yourself, working through the base center, it will lead to sometimes improper behavior, I believe, because I actually think that the procreation and the continuance of the race, as it were, some of those things are also connected to the base center. Many would say the sex center, but that's a functional thing. But I think that sort of, again, you know, continuity of our existence. It's about survival is a good word. All those things, a lot of those things come from the base center. And broadly speaking, if you avoid those things, you can have an imbalance. I think if you do, you are able to, and I don't hold myself up as a great example. It's only recently I've really started to grapple with this. But if you do, are able to bring the energies through that center, your whole behavior will, for want of a better word, just be better, be more correct.
To be like more morally virtuous, or what?
Some would use the word morally.
Okay.
It's kind of above morality in one way.
Yes.
It's correct function.
Yeah.
Right conduct.
Yeah, right conduct's a good word for it. And what about like, an aspect of straying too far and, straying into materialism away from putting material things?
Okay, all the energies, and all the chakras, and particularly the lower ones, can be excessively used and are excessively used. And so, yes, if you got it out of balance, if you had that's another of the dangers where people say focus on some of these lower centers. The last thing most of us actually need. There's already far too much pressure of energy down towards the lower centers, but not nearly enough up towards the higher ones in most people. So yes, you could absolutely, in that center, become a complete materialist if you didn't take the energies higher. Coming back to the fact that the lower centers should be governed by the higher ones.
Exactly.
If you're acting in service, it's extremely valuable, chakra, because you're guided by the higher chakras, your great love for humanity, whatever's motivating you. If you're more advanced, your oneness with God, that you know that all life is interrelated, and it would be just to you insane, you could almost say.
Yes,
not
exactly.
to serve other life, just to dwell on your selfish self. Those motivations can guide you, but you'll still need the practical abilities to function, and the functionality. And again, I must come back to Dr. King, because he was such a fantastic example of this. I mean, he could go out, as I say, from an elevated contact with advanced intelligence, and then talk about a legal matter, a physical problem.
I see, just go from that.
On one occasion, he was due to take a transmission from a cosmic intelligence, and he cancelled it because there was a leak in the temple in America, and which had to be fixed.
Like it was raining, a water leak.
Yes, and it could have caused tremendous flooding, and they didn't have loads of money, and it could have really damaged their function. And he had to cancel the transmission, which was a difficult decision to make, but he was complimented for it.
It's a good anecdote.
So it's a practicality as well.
Yeah, no, I think there's a really clear message that we can take away from, but the practicality about putting things in the right place, and also about the nature of correct function or correct behavior.
Yeah.
What about if we come up a little bit to the sex center? I mean, what would you say there in terms of what that chakra actually relates to?
I mean, I think a lot of people know one thing that it relates to. It's the only chakra, I think, that you can really physically activate. You can activate others a bit, and there are exercises. Actually, there are exercises people use to activate certain other centers, which are dangerous.
I see. Okay.
I wouldn't recommend. So that's not completely true, but it's the one most people are familiar with. They very readily do it, and it activates it actually up the front of the body, not up the spine. It's interesting. I've been looking into the Mahabharata recently a bit. And there are first of all, let me say, there are a number of divine incarnations in there, not just one or not just Sri Krishna, a number of them. I'm not saying all those, by the way, came from other worlds at all. It's a very ancient time, I believe, that's being described there. I don't believe it happened when that book was first written down.
I'll see. Okay.
In my view, it could well be a reading of the Akashic records by the person who wrote it down. I think he was Sri Vyasa, I believe. So it could be a very ancient time. It could be a very ancient time. And it describes incarnations, virgin births, let's call them.
Okay.
Not just Jesus by any means. There are others too. I mean, Samson's mother was incapable of childbirth and so on.
Yeah.
But this is an ancient time. But one of the things interesting, you do have two individuals in it. One is Draupadi, regarded as a goddess, I think, and her twin brother, whose name I don't know at the moment. But they were said to have been born as adults through fire.
Okay.
Now, I only mention that because I do believe that the time will come on this earth again, and it's not that I believe it, we have been told it in the teachings Dr. King received, when there will be birth through the flame of the Logos of Earth, Mother Earth, and people will be born as adults in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So procreation now is a necessity, but I think it's also a reflection on the state of involution that we've reached, that it is a necessity.
I see.
As I would say is reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't be necessary. It is necessary, as is the type of life after death that we have, which is a massive subject in itself, which, again, shouldn't be necessary in the way that we have it. This is all a result of our involution. But however, we do need the sex center for procreation. Of course, many of us have used it for other things. And that isn't the true nature of it. Now, if you were to raise Kundalini up the spine, it's a wonderful chakra. It's, I think, possibly a smaller one, strangely enough. It's not smaller in its usage on Earth. It's massive usage on Earth. It's very much used, and very much draws in energy and so forth, and focused on and concentrated on and activated, because it's easy to activate physically. But actually, if it was done in a should we say, more purified form through the spine, it's a center of great perception, a feeling, compassion, I think very much individual, as it were, one-on-one compassion for individuals.
I think that would be surprising for people.
Empathy, and some psychic perception as well.
Yeah, I actually remember for one of our previous shows when we were talking about the chakras, I think, looking at what Dr. King said in the 9 Freedoms and others, he was talking about the tremendous compassion that you can feel.
Well, you are.
Yeah, once you awaken once you're raising the complete up spine through the sex center. I think he may have even given the example of the Master Jesus doing that. And I was surprised because you would typically only associate that with the heart, but actually that's the correct use of that center.
Yes, and it will be different. And all the centers are different, but that's all good. Every element is needed. If it's used correctly, it's a bit like I said earlier about the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, the superconscious mind. Some of the old yogis frowned on the conscious mind. And in a sense, and Dr. King has said this, when you enter samadhi, in one way you slaughter the conscious mind. And it does, and that's why it resists it so much when you're trying to get to the Christ center. But you will need the conscious mind again to be active in the world,
to function.
And so these are all to be used in the same way all the chakras are to be used. And in fact, the analytical process in its rightful place is brilliant and is necessary. And people miss out a lot by not using it. Some people in the New Age movement seem to cast it aside and just see where our imagination takes us, and our feelings take us.
I see.
And it brings a discipline that we require.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, by the way, on that note. When you raise the Kundalini to the Christ center, and you eventually are able to raise it above that, and it's in its entirety, which I haven't done, and then you close the Christ center in order to raise the energy higher, the Christ center at that point, we're told in the 9 Freedoms, is violet and yellow and violet. Now, the center itself, and I have seen this, is what I've seen anyway, is I would say like a violet on the paler side. Very vivid, extremely vivid.
Okay.
But when it's closed, there's that yellow there. And that, I believe, is a seed of consciousness that's there that you need because it's a center of knowing. When you go higher, it's a center of being.
Okay. So what's the significance of the color, do you think? I mean, why would it be like...
Well, I'm just mentioning the fact that the yellow, which is often associated with the solar plexus center, which is associated with analysis, not analysis, but understanding, comprehension, is still present. When you close that center,
I see.
some comprehension has been brought to you.
So you talked a little bit about the solar plexus so far. I thought we just come to that and finish there. So we've covered the lower 3 chakras. But what would you say, if you were describing what the solar plexus, just in a nutshell, then relates to in our life?
It's a wonderful center.
Mm-hmm.
It's a all the centers are actually wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
They're used correctly. But it's a very powerful center. It's a battery center.
Mm-hmm.
It's an energy through which you receive energy from others. So that's why a lot of people, they pick up, got a funny feeling in my stomach, or they pick up sensations there. You can get clairsentience there, which is clear feeling there. And that many psychic abilities can be developed, and often are developed. When I first did my clairaudience, I didn't realize it at the time. It was very much based, I believe now, around the solar plexus center. But I'm giving my take on it now. It's impressions, mental impressions, it's mental ideas.
Mm-hmm.
There comes a stage, which I came to not very long ago actually, where I wanted to move beyond ideas and impressions and to something actual. But it's extremely valuable. Saint Guling, who is a Chinese ascended master from this earth, but very advanced, says it's a center of understanding. I think he says solar plexus center where understanding is lodged.
Okay.
I think is the phrase.
It's understanding, yeah.
Yeah. And he's a great master. It's interesting in theosophy, actually. I divert for a moment. There is reference to a Lord Ling in some branches of theosophy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I've often wondered if that is the same intelligence, Chinese master. But anyway, he describes it as such. It has an analytical ability. It has many intellectual abilities. I would say it's very much overused as well on Earth.
Yeah.
It governs and dominates the way we function, our legal system, our political system, our mathematics. There are therefore flaws within it because analysis isn't very good at coping with paradox. Like two opposites can both be true.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you need to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
But in its place, it's fantastic center.
Yeah, well, I think it brings it back kind of full circle on the show, because you started with this idea that it's really a key to life really is about the higher chakras is influencing your lower chakras and governing those. Yeah. And what you're talking about there is the solar plexus kind of not running amok, but sort of, not having the inspiration, the guidance, the discipline of the higher chakras to guide it towards real wisdom, and not just the result of the analytical or intellectual insight that you make.
Yeah, and at worst, it can sort of foster the energy of doubt, because doubt can be an energy, not a particular thought. Because we develop, particularly in our universities and so on, and I went to one myself, and I know you did, but we develop very much the analytical process, the critical thinking process,
yes,
which has its place, but it's not creative. Hence, many critical thinkers aren't able actually to come up with solutions, or if they do, they often don't necessarily work because you need higher inspiration for that. You need to go higher. So it has its place. It's a very good place, but if it just becomes a doubting faculty, and that can be an energy that you feel, it's like an sort of an instinct to doubt. You hear something, like some people listening to this show will say, this sounds really wacky to me, and rule it out.
Right.
Just because it sounds wacky to them.
Right.
They don't know whether it's true. They haven't experienced these things. But their doubt alone, without investigation, will end it. But if it's proper, skepticism is almost like becomes cynicism and negativity. But in its real meaning, if you are analyzing something and really trying to get to the bottom of it, you do need it, and you very much do need it in the spiritual movement. Brings us back to where we started.
Absolutely.
There's some of the claims that are out there, which it's not just that they're wacky. If they were just wacky and harmless, that would be one thing, and people are entitled to their opinions, I suppose, in a way, but they're not. And this is where with Kundalini and with chakras, you need the right guidance, you need the right practices, and you need the right teacher who actually knows what they're teaching you from experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say in closing there, because like the example of someone listening to the show, they can hear the information, they may make a judgment which sounds wacky or whatnot. But if they had the intuitive guidance of their own higher self that was recognizing truth, there would be a completely different reaction there.
Well, that happened to you and me, I think, when we first found, for example, the etheric side in our youth. I mean, I was absolutely staggered that people couldn't see it because it was so obvious to me. But it was just their doubting. It didn't sound right. It sounded like a cult. It sounded like a this. It wasn't actually, but to them it sounded like that. And without looking into it, without really going, they're not obligated to look into it, by the way. But if they don't, they are in no position to judge it. And they're certainly in no position to rule it out as a bad idea.
Again, key to life, the higher chakras covering the lower ones. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Darren.
So in the same way that our conscious mind should be governed by our higher self, our lower chakras should really be governed by and serve the needs of our higher chakras. For example, ideally we organize the basic aspects of our lives so that we can be of the best possible service to others. And this, of course, is a lot easier said than done, considering how much we overcommit ourselves or overcomplicate our lives, even when we know that service is the most important thing that any of us can do. Another example would be using our intellect in tandem with our intuition. So rather than allowing ourselves to be limited by our intellect, we can draw on the creative inspiration that flows from our higher chakras that allow us to create great works of art or solve big problems, for example. This is an essential key to life and to becoming more advanced. In fact, it's what more spiritually advanced people do, and what we can change about our own lives to become more like them, which is specifically to allow our lower chakras to be guided by our higher chakras, and to allow the practical aspects of our life to be led by the inspiration of our own higher self. Now, if you enjoyed that episode in terms of the different aspects of life that each of our chakras relate to, then be sure to hit that bell and follow us for more. You can also check out this video over here in which Rich and I go deeper into how to unblock each of your chakras, or this video over here in which Rich and I explore how you can unlock your own intuition, that still small voice within you. And if you can get to London early April this year, then I encourage you to check out the details in the description below about Rich's upcoming event, Awaken Your Chakras, Key to All Spiritual Powers. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time.